Hello vinyl community, particularly the Beatles section of the vinyl community, and welcome to my difficult second album. This is my second video on my channel. Really enjoyed making the first one, and this one is all about the American Beatles albums, the Capitol albums, released in the initial few years of the Beatles' career from 1964 until 1967, when the Beatles' catalogue standardised on both sides of the Atlantic. I've been particularly interested in the Capitol albums since I was quite young, because I was familiar with, obviously very, very familiar with the Beatles' UK catalogue, and obviously that's been completely standardised across the world since 1987 when they came out on CD, and then subsequently in 2009 when the remasters came out. So when I listen to the Beatles, generally speaking, my go-to are the albums that they released on this side of the Atlantic, and the ones that are well known to everybody. However, the American albums were always really, really interesting to me because because I'm so familiar with the Beatles. It's nice to hear their music in different configurations, different track lists, and as a result of that, the American albums are really, really interesting. So I've managed to get hold of at least one copy of most of them, and I'd like to show those today. I think that some of them work really, really well, and others are a little bit more of a hodgepodge of tracks from different eras that don't really knit together very, very well. I'll let you know which ones they are when I get to them. So I'm going to begin with this album here, Meet the Beatles, which is how most of America first came into contact with the group. Prior to Capitol releasing Meet the Beatles, the VJ label in America released Introducing the Beatles, which I don't have in my collection at the moment. And Introducing the Beatles is basically the British Please Please Me album minus the odd track, which did sell, and I think subsequently sold more once Beatlemania caught on. But ask most Americans of the time, this is the Beatles' first album in America, Meet the Beatles, and it's taken used the front cover of With the Beatles from the UK, and this is by far one of my favourite Beatles pictures, if not my favourite Beatles picture of all time. It's absolutely iconic. This is a stereo version of Meet the Beatles. It's actually still in shrink wrap. I'm not going to get all of these out, but this one, just to show you, I haven't got the original inner sleeve, but it is a Capitol Rainbow stereo copy, and I really, really like this album. Now's probably a good time to talk about the main difference between the UK and the US in their approach to records. Back in those days, the Beatles and George Martin, and I think British releases on the whole, had singles on 45 here and LPs on 33 here, and Never the Twain Shall Meet. So we have lots and lots of songs that were the A-sides of singles, big hits in England, that never appeared on UK albums. So From Me to You, She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, I Feel Fine, Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out, the list goes on. Those songs never appeared on British albums. In America, they absolutely built an album around the hit single. And I think, as far as this album is concerned, this is a really, really good listen, and you can see why Beatlemania, why this helped to kick off Beatlemania in America. So it begins with the two sides of the single, which had taken hold, I Want to Hold Your Hand and This Boy. British Mind. I Want to Hold Your Hand and I Saw Her Standing There. Track 3 is This Boy. I Want to Hold Your Hand and This Boy were of course the British single in late '63. And then after that it is all songs from With the Beatles. So we've got It Won't Be Long, All I've Got to Do, All My Loving, side 2, Don't Bother Me, Little Child, Till There Was You, Hold Me Tight, I Want to Be Your Man, and Not a Second Time. And I just think it's a really, really great collection of songs, and like I said before, you can totally see why the band took off. Okay, falling well and truly into my good capital category is the Beatles' second album. So good, I've got it twice. This is the mono version and it's on the Capitol Rainbow label. What a great rock and roll album this one is. I've watched quite a few videos of one or two people. I know Mr. Mayo is very, very keen on the Beatles' second album. The songs, they do not let up, and it just highlights what an absolutely cracking rock and roll band the Beatles were. Starting off with Roll Over Beethoven, Money's on there, Long Tall Sally, Please Mr. Postman, and finishes with She Loves You, obviously another huge hit in America. Great little cover with the sepia photographs. And just a really, really great record. There's a stereo version here. The stereo version famously is ladled with reverb. And this is where certain fans accuse the American albums of sacrilege, because not only were the running orders tinkered with, but Dave Dexter, who was in charge of the Beatles releases on Capitol, absolutely smothered certain tracks in reverb because he felt that the British releases sounded a bit thin and weak sounding for the American market, so he beefed them up and smothered them in reverb, which isn't everyone's cup of tea. My go-to version of the Beatles is generally the mono records, particularly the mono remasters. But it's quite refreshing to listen to them in a different way, and I don't mind this too much. I quite like it, particularly when the guitar riff for Roll Over Beethoven starts and that reverb is there. It just sounds really exciting and has that sort of live feel. So Meet the Beatles and the Beatles' second album, I think, are really, really great little collections. Okay, so moving on here, we've got the American version of A Hard Day's Night, which is a soundtrack in the sort of pure sense of the word. In Britain, we had one side of Beatles songs from the film, and then the second side was songs that were being recorded at a similar time. This one is purely songs from the film, with I'll Cry Instead as well, which didn't make it in the end. Or I Cry Instead, as it says in the back here, I've just noticed. I don't know if that's a mistake on every sleeve or whether it was just an early one, but anyway, this is the only non-Capitol album I've got here, but I've put it in with the collection because it appeared in the box set that came out a couple of years ago. So this is the United Artists version of half Beatles and half George Martin Orchestra. It's decent enough to listen to. But I really, really love Ringo's theme, the This Boy instrumental that accompanied the parading sequence from A Hard Day's Night. That's that one. That's something new, which the cover of which has seen better days, a bit of a battered one. This is a mono copy. It is a Capitol Rainbow as well. Bit tattered around the edges, bit of crackle on it, but it plays reasonably well. And these songs are a mixture of songs from the second side of A Hard Day's Night, the Long Tall Sally EP, and one or two tracks from A Hard Day's Night itself. We've got Tell Me Why and I Love Her, I'm Happy Just to Dance With You, and If I Fell. And also, as you can see here, the German version of I Want to Hold Your Hand, Komm Gib mir deine Hand. The Americans obviously felt that anything recorded by the Beatles was fair game to release. In this country, we didn't hear that until Rarities in the late 70s. I believe, and now it's on Past Masters Volume 1. Beatles 65, which is basically Beatles for Sale minus a few songs plus I Feel Fine and She's a Woman single. This one is in a bit of a state, very, very crackly. It's a stereo copy, and it features a really bad example for me of reverb, which is absolutely slatted all over I Feel Fine and She's a Woman. Basically, it sounds like they're singing in an echo chamber. It's not very nice to listen to for me. So that's that one. Then come 1965, Capitol felt that they had a little gap in their Beatles collection, which is of course the songs that were on Introducing the Beatles. So they gathered those together and produced a version of that album, 11 songs I think, is it? Yeah, 11 songs off Please Please Me, and they called it the Early Beatles. There we go, Beatles 6. Another 1965 release. Songs from a variety of different places. Beatles for Sale, some off the second side of the Help album in England. This is not an original Capitol. You can see it's got the gold record thing on there, and it's actually an Apple label inside. But I quite like this playlist. Really like You Like Me Too Much by George, which is not a well-known George Harrison song, but I've always really loved that one. And I guess the most notable thing about Beatles 6 was that this was the only place in the world that you could hear the song Bad Boy, a Larry Williams cover, until the Beatles released it in their own country at the end of '66 on a collection of Beatles oldies. So yeah, this one, I think Dizzy Miss Lizzie was also recorded especially for Beatles 6. So they got those songs well before the Help album represented it in England. Speaking of which, another soundtrack album in the same vein as A Hard Day's Night, half Beatles songs and half orchestral pieces. It's this is the musical score by Ken Thorne this time. Yeah, it's interesting. The album starts with that James Bond theme that's in the Help soundtrack before Help comes in, which always struck me as strange when I was young, because I picked this one up probably when I was about 12 or 13, I think. And this is also a 70s Apple label version. Now we're moving back into good territory now with Rubber Soul. Now there is a certain school of thought amongst Beatles fans that the American version of Rubber Soul is better than the English version of Rubber Soul. I don't think I can say that. I don't think I can agree with that, because Rubber Soul is this almighty piece of art in my head. However, I can see where these people are coming from, because as a playlist it does hang together really well. So there were some songs on Rubber Soul in England that didn't appear on this, and they also had two leftover songs from the British Help album, which were I've Just Seen a Face and It's Only Love, which actually start off each respective side of this album. And what you get is a folk rock themed album. So I've Just Seen a Face, Into Norwegian Wood, You Won't See Me, there's Michelle on there, Girl, I'm Looking Through You, In My Life, Run for Your Life, sort of acoustic guitar led songs on the whole. And yeah, it's quite thematic. And famously, this is the version of Rubber Soul that Brian Wilson would have heard, which inspired him to write Pet Sounds, which inspired the Beatles to go to Sgt. Pepper. So, important record there. One of the most famous or infamous albums in the Beatles catalogue is Yesterday and Today. Unfortunately, I'm not holding a gold mine in my hands. This is not a Butcher cover. It's a Second State. It's a later pressing. I think it might be 67. This has got the original inner sleeve. I'm not sure if that's a 66 or a 67 inner sleeve. But no amount of peeling this will reveal the famous Butcher cover. And yes, this album is more of a hodgepodge of songs. You've got songs off Rubber Soul, and you've got you've got songs, and Yesterday and Act Naturally are off the British Help. And then the Beatles sent 3 songs over to America to be released on this album before the British Revolver. I'm Only Sleeping, Dr. Robert and Angel Bird Can Sing, 3 Lennon songs that appeared on this album first, which made the next record, which is the Capitol Revolver, 11 tracks. And it's pretty redundant, this one. I've got it just because I'm a collector, but it's a stereo copy, it's an original. But yeah, you're missing those 3 songs I just mentioned, and without those 3 songs, this is not Revolver, I'm afraid. It is a very pale imitation of it. But this is what the Americans had for a long, long time. I've got quite an early Sgt. Pepper here, Capitol label. It's got the cutouts, but no psychedelic inner sleeve. And it's a pretty straightforward. It's a mono version. And finally, this one. I was always fascinated by this one. In the late 70s in Britain, the Beatles brought out a blue box set called Beatles Collection, which had an album which was originally you could only get in that box, which was the Beatles' Rarities. And they were going to release it in America until someone decided, but hang on a minute, these songs aren't rarities in America, we'll do our own, thank you very much. So they produced this. So in America, this album was the very first place Americans could hear the Ringo version of Love Me Do. There's Misery and There's a Place off Please Please Me. Sie liebt dich, which is the other German language version of She Loves You. Then there's different versions of And I Love Her, Help, I'm Only Sleeping, I'm the Walrus. There's the Penny Lane extra trumpet bit. There's a mono version of Helter Skelter, which is, I think it's about 50 seconds shorter, and it doesn't have the I've got blisters on my fingers comment from Ringo. There's a faster version of Don't Pass Me By, which only appeared on the mono white album that the Americans never got. Got the Inner Light, which is a beautiful B-side of Lady Madonna. There's the Wildlife version of Across the Universe, and You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, and then Sgt. Pepper in a Groove, which is of course the famous gobbledygook run-out groove that appeared in British versions of Sgt. Pepper. So I thought this was a nice little album to have on the whole. And that is my US collection complete. So I would say overall, adore Meet the Beatles and the Beatles' second album. I quite like Rubber Soul. Beatles 6 has quite a nice collection of songs on it, but generally speaking, yeah, I'm a Brit, I'm afraid. The real albums are the ones for me at the end of the day, but they are interesting little oddities for me to have, and I'm really, really pleased I've got them in my collection. So I'm glad, if you have stuck around to the end of this video, I'm glad you have done, and I hope you enjoyed it. And the next time I see you, I'm hoping to do an album review. I'm going to choose one of the original Beatles albums and do an album review on that. I also hope to choose some solo Beatles albums as well. And as I mentioned in the first video, when the Sgt. Pepper Deluxe arrives, absolutely we'll be doing a video on that too. So again, thank you for watching, and goodbye.